There are a lot of things we can be indecisive about, but when it comes to Jesus, we have to make a choice. You have to make a choice. And everywhere Jesus went, he made that clear. In fact, he was the source of intense reactions and great debate. And really nothing has changed. It's still that way regarding Jesus. Jesus does not give us the luxury of being neutral about him. We have to make a decision. We either stay behind the line or we cross the line, but we cannot stand on the line. In American history, the Battle of the Alamo stands as a prime example of bold decisiveness. It was 1836 when a band of fewer than 200 men defended that little mission in San Antonio, Texas, against 6,000 Mexican troops led by General Santa Anna. And so for 2 weeks, they held the Alamo against impossible odds. But then on March 5th, the night before what would surely be the final assault, William Barrett Travis, the commander of the Texans, called a meeting of his men. And he told them what to expect. He told them that surely the invaders would break the walls and they would be in the next day. And he drew his sword and he drew a line in the dirt. And he invited everyone who wanted to stay, everyone who wanted to fight, everyone who wanted to defend the Alamo to step across the line. And one by one, they did. Even Jim Bowie, who was sick on a pallet, asked to be carried across the line. And of 184 men, only one refused to step across the line. And we know what happened. The next day, all the defenders of the Alamo died in battle. But what can be said for sure is that day there was no standing on the line. They had to make a choice. A decision had to be made. And so I ask you, as we look at this lesson today, what are you willing to stand for? What are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to sacrifice? So we have to make a decision. We have to choose about Jesus. We either stand behind the line, we can choose ourselves, we can choose what we want to do, or we can cross the line and choose Jesus. But there is no standing on the line. And chapter 7 is a great chapter that helps us examine where we really are in regard to Jesus. Maybe just even asking the question, who is Jesus? Because it's great. It's a great way to examine our answer to that question as we see the crowds try to answer that question for themselves, how they reacted to the claims and the things that Jesus did. And we see that choice was there. Some believed in him. Some crossed that line. Some followed him, but some didn't. Some wanted to kill him. Some wanted to arrest him. And we see that all throughout this chapter. Let's just look at just a few verses before we go in depth. It's John chapter 7. Let's start in verse 12. Just see how this plays out throughout the chapter. Verse 12, there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said, he's a good man, others said, no, he's leading people astray. You see the choice that had to be made. Look now at verse 20. The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Verse 31. Yet many of the people believed in him. They said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? Some chose to step across that line. Look at verses 40 and 41. When they heard these words, some of the people said, this really is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. But some said, is the Christ to come from Galilee? Verse 46. The officers even answered, no one ever spoke like this man. So that's why verse 43 is a great summarization of the entire chapter. And that's how Stacy started out his reading a moment ago. There was a division among the people over him. So that verse may, in a casual reading of this chapter, slip your mind. But really, that is the key verse of this chapter, because that's everything that's going on. There was a division among the people over Jesus. And people divide over Jesus all the time, even still. But this chapter really breaks down three main ways that people divided and continue to divide over Jesus. They divide over his teachings, they divide over his source, where he comes from, but they also divide over his offer. And so with each statement that Jesus makes, with each appearance that Jesus makes, with each action that Jesus takes, he is drawing that line in the sand, and he's saying, will you cross that line? There's no standing on the line. We have to make a choice. First of all, we have to make a choice regarding his teachings. We're going to pick up in verse 14, where about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. John chapter 7, now verse 15. The Jews therefore marveled, saying, "How is it that this man has learning when he has never studied?" So Jesus answered him, "My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he'll know whether the teaching is from God or whether I'm speaking on my own authority. The one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood." Verse 24, Jesus concludes this section by saying, "Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." So to set the scene, as John does a great job doing, this is the time of the Feast of Booths. And I always think of Nehemiah chapter 8, whenever they realized they hadn't been doing this for like 1,000 years. This is the Feast of Booths that the Jews had been doing for so long. People came every year all over the place to come to Jerusalem to celebrate this feast. This was one of the three major things that the Jews would do every year. This was a big deal. There was people all over the place. And Jesus had been kind of building interest. He's talked about himself. He's made claims about himself, but he's not really done so publicly. And so Jesus is in this situation, or his brothers are thinking sarcastically, "Hey, you got to go make yourself known to the world." So we pick up in verse 3 through 5, and that's what's happening there. So the Feast of Booths at hand, his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples may also see the works you're doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourselves to the world." How do we know they're being sarcastic? Well, John tells us, "For even his brothers did not believe in him." So they're saying, go and use this opportunity to tell the world who you really are. If you really are the Savior, if you really are the Messiah, right? Well, Jesus did go to the feast, and he did tell the world who he really was, but not in the way that they imagined. Not in the way that they thought. And what's great about this chapter, John focuses on how the crowds in Jerusalem responded to Jesus' teachings during this Feast of Booths, during this time where there are people all over the place coming to celebrate this feast. They see Jesus, they hear Jesus, and people are divided over Jesus. This discussion continues to take place and grow throughout the chapter. But at this point, it kind of is starting in whispers because they're afraid. They're afraid, they're intimidated by their leaders. They're not quite sure where their leaders stand on Jesus, and they don't want to get in trouble and have the same fate as those who stand opposed to the Jewish leaders. So somewhere in about the middle of the feast, Jesus went to the temple grounds where a crowd had gathered, and he begins to teach. And we're not told all the things that he taught about, but we are told that the Jews marveled at his teachings. We can imagine, of course, we have so many sections about Jesus' teachings, but they're marveling that he's never studied, or at least they've never seen him study. They don't know how he could know all these things. So Jesus answers in verse 16, "My teaching is not mine, but him who sent me. If anyone's will is to do God's will, they'll know that," right? He'll know whether the teaching's from God or whether I'm just trying to develop my own following and bring glory to myself, whether I'm speaking on my own authority. It's interesting to note the relation between faith and obedience. This is a struggle with a lot of people, the relation between faith and obedience. And the truth is, the reality is, only those who really believe obey. And no matter what you say, no matter what you claim, only those who obey really believe. That's always been true, but it's always been a struggle. And I think the song Trust and Obey really pulls that out, pulls that concept out. There's that line in the middle, but we never can prove the delights of his love until on the altar we lay, right? The sacrifice, the obedience that we're willing to do, for the favor he shows us and the joy he bestows, are for those who trust and obey. Only those who are willing to cross the line, right? Only those who are willing to do what he says, to risk everything, to lay it all on the altar. Well, Jesus is talking about this attitude. He's declaring that just as a humble and obedient spirit leads us to faith, it is also true that a proud and rebellious spirit leads us to ignore God, leads us to reject God. And so again, he's drawing a line in the sand with his teachings. With his teachings, he's saying, will you cross the line? And for a lot of people, they weren't willing. Verses 25 through 27, some of the people of Jerusalem therefore said, is not this the man whom they seek to kill? And here he is speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Could it be that the authorities really know that this is the Christ? But we know where this man comes from, and when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. Well, the reality is Jesus is setting up for us, for them, and for us. If you choose Jesus, you have to choose his teachings. If you choose me, you have to obey. You have to choose my teachings. And if you choose Jesus, your attitude will change toward the things he says. No, you're not going to have this rebellious, disobedient spirit. Your attitude's going to change toward what he says, even if you don't fully understand his teachings. Even if you don't agree with his teachings, even if you don't really want to do what he says, your attitude is going to change toward his teachings in such a way that you will put aside what you think and what you feel, and you'll accept his teachings. If you choose Jesus, you'll respect his teachings. You'll abide by his teachings no matter where you think you should. You'll teach others to abide by his teachings. And if you cross that line, that means you will fight for Jesus and you will fight for his teachings. And that's about anything, right? Whether about the most easy concepts to agree with that we can all agree on, or some of those that could be controversial. Maybe like we talked about last week with the idea of church discipline. Or just worship and how we come to God and what God expects us to do. Church leadership and women's roles. Or marriage and divorce. Or what Jesus teaches about sin or hell or obedience or repentance. Jesus continues to teach the same things in the same way. Through his word, we have his teachings. And every one of those is a line in the sand that Jesus is drawing, and he's forcing us to make a choice. You can't have it both ways. You can't stand on the line. You're either going to follow them or you aren't. There's no standing on the line. We have to make a choice regarding his teachings. We also have to make a choice regarding his source, regarding his origin. And this was the struggle here, going to verse 27. But we know where this man comes from, right? They've said he's from Galilee, or they know he's from Nazareth. And when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. So Jesus proclaimed as he taught in the temple, you know me, and you know where I come from. But I've not come on my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him. And he sent me. So you can see the debate building. And you can also see the confusion starting to build as well as this chapter and this confrontation unfolds. Some people, as we read a moment ago, are amazed that Jesus is even allowed to be here, right? If they're making claims that they want to kill this man, shouldn't they be shutting him down? Shouldn't they be stopping him from teaching? Why aren't they stopping him? Why is he even here? That's one of the debates that's going on. Maybe they think he really is the Messiah. Well, that also leads to another debate about who really is the Messiah and how will we know. Remember, there have been some 400 years since there had been a word from God, from a prophet of God, right? Malachi being the last one. And so they have all this Old Testament history that they're reading and they're studying and they're trying to see who's the Messiah. Who can we pick out? Maybe this one's the one, right? We're waiting and waiting. And so there's some hints, right? There's some things we know. Well, one of the things they're discussing is where he's going to come from. Now, I don't exactly understand where this doctrine came about, but they believed that the Messiah, the real Messiah, nobody would really know where he came from. He would have an unknown origin. And best I could find, Malachi 3:1 might have been what led them to this conclusion. Malachi 3:1 is a very simple verse that says, when the Messiah appears, he will do so suddenly. So I suppose you could create a doctrine that will say, well, if the Messiah appears suddenly, whatever that might mean in your mind, if he appears suddenly, then I must not be able to know where he came from. I must not be able to track his origin, and so no one will really know where he comes from. And so if we ever have anybody claiming to be Messiah and we know where they come from, then he can't be it, right? So that's maybe we're kind of assuming that's where they get this idea. But for some reason, they have this false idea about that you won't know where the Messiah comes from. But whatever caused them to come up with that, you and I know better that there's 100 passages in the Old Testament that discount that theory, right? That idea, because we do know where the Messiah would come from. All the prophecies say where the birthplace of the Messiah would be, being the town of David, Bethlehem. We know that. And so they don't necessarily associate with that with Jesus. They talk about Galilee, they talk about Nazareth, but we know that he's from Bethlehem, and we know that he fits those prophecies. And so they're not connecting those dots. They're confused. They're arguing over where Jesus has come from. But again, they have to make a choice. Notice there is no neutral reaction, even when it comes to where Jesus comes from. They're confused. They're struggling. The people are trying to decide, is he from God or is he from the devil? But notice those are the choices. When Jesus talks about where he came from, when he talks about his source, they have to choose one or the other. Is he God or is he the devil? There's no choice in between. Now, Jesus answers their concerns, but he doesn't do so confirming his hometown. Notice he goes back to his true source, God and heaven. You know me, and you know where I come from, verse 28, but I've not come on my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him. That's where I really come from. I come from him, and he sent me. Think about how offensive that was. Think about how this is really starting to build the offense and the confusion. Jesus is shocking people, offending people, but he's not doing so just to offend people. He's doing so to force you to make a choice, to force people to decide whether what he said was true or not. Think about how bold of a statement that would be to say, I come from God, I come from heaven. When you say something like that, you can't remain neutral about a guy that says he comes from heaven. You just can't. He's drawing a line and he's forcing us to make a choice. Even still today, we have to choose. Is that right? Is that really where it comes from? Well, what did they do? Well, they crossed the line, verses 30 and 31. So they were seeking to arrest him. But no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Yet, many of the people believed in him. They said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? So that's the thing. Jesus has said he's from heaven. Jesus is from heaven, or at least he says he is. So that right there, that statement, that forces us to make a choice. Do you believe he's from heaven? See, you get the freedom to make that choice. Jesus done everything he can to prove what he's saying is true, but you still get to make the choice. If not, if he's not from heaven and he says he is, how can he just be a good man? How could he be, a good teacher that had some good things to say? No, he's going to be a lot worse than that. If he says he's from heaven and he's not, he's from Satan. That's what that means. But if we do believe him, if we truly believe him, that he is from heaven, then I can't be neutral about him. If you're making the choice to believe that he's from heaven, then your life is going to reflect that. Your choices will reflect that belief. If I believe he's from heaven, my actions are going to say that I believe he's from heaven. And so do you believe that? Do you believe what Jesus says, that he is from God? Do your words show that you believe that? Do your actions show that you believe that? See, Jesus, just with that, he's drawn a line in the sand. And he's calling you. Will you step over? Will you cross the line? Or will you just try to stand in the middle? See, we've got to make a choice regarding his teaching. We have to make a choice regarding his source. We also have to make a choice regarding his offer. In John chapter 7, picking up in verse 37, on the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come and drink. Let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For as yet the Spirit had not been given because Jesus was not yet glorified. Now at this point, most people have made up their mind. Jesus has drawn the line, and some have stepped over and some have stayed on their side of the line. We know where the Jewish leaders stand. They stand with themselves, right? They made their own choice. Jesus' words in the temple were nothing less than dangerous blasphemy to them. It was against their pride. It was against their power. They made their choice about this man. They also understood what he was saying, right? They understood that what Jesus was saying was obvious. He was claiming to be the Messiah. He was claiming to be the Son of God. They made their choice. They tried to arrest him, but they couldn't yet because Jesus refused to be on any timetable other than that of God the Father. It wasn't his time. He was going to be arrested. He was going to go to the cross, but not yet. It's the last day of the feast. This feast, I think, took about a week. Jesus stands up. And this time, and all three of these were kind of on different days throughout the week. This is the last day. And this time he says something, well, quite remarkable. He's talking about water, right? He's talking about living water, that he is the source of living water. He even uses this quote, "Out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." And he says, that's about me. What's really amazing about this, and John doesn't tell us, but we do know from the Old Testament, from our understanding of the feast and from history, that this day, there's a reason Jesus said that on this day. Each day of this feast, a priest would journey to the pool of Siloam and fill a golden pitcher with water. And you can imagine, what they'd done to the rituals and the sacrifices and the feasts at this point in Jewish history, how that procession would be, carrying this golden bowl in a parade-like procession back to the temple. And the water would be poured out as an offering of thanksgiving to God. But on this day, that didn't happen. On the last day, they don't do that. And on the last day, that's when Jesus says, if anyone needs water, if anyone thirsts, you come to me to get it. If anyone thirsts, come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Think about what Jesus is doing at a time when people are thirsty. This is how Kyle Yates writes. How dramatic. In the midst of spiritual hunger, and the people have been that way for so long, he spoke things in John like, I am the bread of life. And now seeing the searing thirst of the soul, he declares that he is the water of life. At a time where it's so hypocritical, at a time where it's all about power and politics, and it's not even about God anymore. And the Jewish leaders are offering nothing for the soul. Jesus says, if you really want something to refresh your soul, here I am. And his water is the water of life that refreshes and heals and saves eternally. And the offer is simple. Come to me and drink. But that is a choice. That is a line in the sand, isn't it? Because you can drink. You can have your fill. You can have all you ever would need spiritually. I can give that to you if you cross the line. If you come to me and drink. If you'll decide I am the Messiah, if you'll decide and dedicate your life to me, you can have eternal life. It forces us to choose. Even so, Jesus saying that same thing, come to me and drink. He's saying that to us today, and he's forcing us to choose. You can't stand on the line and get the water. You have to cross the line. Will I come to him and receive what he offers? Will I give myself in order to receive what he offers? Or will I stay in my pride? Will I stay where I'm at, where I'm comfortable, and choose myself? And remain thirsty and hungry and lost and in the dark. That's the choice. Now, Jesus had intensified his teaching throughout these sections of the chapter, and the responses got more and more intense as well. And not just for the negative. Yes, there were those seeking to hunt him down and arrest him and kill him, but notice verses 40 and 41, some people said this really is the prophet. Some people said this is the Christ. The same thing that Peter said. This is the Christ. And still some said, is the Christ to come from Galilee? Some of these people, Jesus is drawing a line over and over and over, and some of them had made their choice. They're stepping over the line. Some of them are deciding how they view Jesus. Some of them are ready to accept Jesus as truly having been sent from God. And so, in a beautiful and simple observation that summarizes this entire chapter, John says in verse 43, so there was a division among the people over him. Christ continued to draw that line over and over and over. Some people wanted to arrest him. Some people wanted to kill him. Some believed. Some were just astonished. Verse 44, some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid their hands on him. The officers then came to the chief priests and Pharisees, who said to him, why did you not bring him? I guess they were supposed to. They were supposed to go get Jesus. And the officers said, well, no one ever spoke like this man. In the end, isn't that the choice? Right? People will either love him or hate him. It was that way in John chapter 7. It was that way when Jesus walked this earth. It's the same way today. People are either going to love him or hate him. But Jesus refuses to let us make any choice but that. And a lot of people try. He's a good man. He says some good things. Maybe I'll pick a few things out that I could try to work on, but he's not really the Messiah. I mean, he's not really God. I really don't have to do everything he says. A lot of people try to walk the line. Jesus doesn't allow us that choice, that fatal luxury of indecisiveness. That's not an option. Jesus forces us to choose. Will you stay on your side of the line, or will you cross it? We have to make a choice regarding his teachings, regarding his offer, regarding his source. All of these things, Jesus draws a line in the sand. I don't think you could come away from reading John chapter 7 and say that Jesus was a passive figure. That Jesus never wanted to step on anybody's toes. Actually, I think it's pretty clear Jesus was a divisive person. Now, not like other divisive people. Not like the first thing that comes to your mind, because most people that are divisive are just doing it for themselves, right? They're doing it for their pride and for their pettiness and for their own glory, but that's not Jesus. Jesus was a divisive person because he told the truth. And the truth draws a line in the sand. It just does. The truth Jesus presents forces people to make a choice. In fact, John had told us from the very outset of his gospel that that's the kind of Jesus he's going to present to us. It's John chapter 1, 11 and 12. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him, but to all who did receive him, all who believed in his name, all who crossed that line, he gave the right to become children of God. There is no way to be undecided when it comes to Jesus. You have to choose. And only you can do it, but you have to choose. You're either for him or you're against him. You're either going to accept him and be all in, or you have to reject him. That's the only other choice. Because simply refusing to choose is choosing to reject him. Standing on the line means you have not crossed the line. You have to make a choice. Which will it be? So my challenge for you today is this. I put a line. This is going to be our line. I put some of these in the back on the table, and I want you to grab one of these on your way out to remember what Jesus does, even for us today. I want you to take this home, and just for it to be a reminder, you could put it on maybe the floor as you leave your bedroom, or maybe on the wall on your way out of the garage door, somewhere visible, right? Somewhere that you're going to see it every day. And as you leave that room, it's going to force you to think about that, to stop and think for just a moment, what will I do to cross the line for Jesus today? And if I'm not really on board with Jesus, if I haven't chosen Jesus, I might as well just stay where I'm at. I might as well not go anywhere. But if I'm going to cross that line, what am I going to do? Will it be a loving attitude that I'm going to display as I cross this line today in my life, in my work, and what I do today? Will I talk to someone about Jesus today? As I cross this line, am I going to think about a brother or a sister and maybe spend a little time with them, visit, a call, send them a card? Will it be somebody that I'm going to pray for? As I cross this line, I'm going to pray for them this week, and I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them that I prayed for them. Will I reach out to someone who's struggling? As you cross that line every day, do something every day that shows Jesus. You chose him. That shows you chose Jesus. Some people accept Jesus as the Son of God. Others deny that he ever lived. Some people believe that he was a good man, but he was not the Son of God. But even some of us say, yes, I recognize him as the Son of God, but maybe we haven't done anything about it. We've not done enough about it. We've not really obeyed him. And so I just ask, what about you? Because Jesus is presenting this clear challenge to you to make a decision about him. What will you decide? Because your decision right now, today, will affect tomorrow and the next day and the rest of your life, and it's going to have an eternal difference. So what will you choose? I'll put this line up here as well. And if you know right now you're ready to do something different, you're ready to cross the line, well, you can come. You can come while we stand and while we sing.